Kaylee, and today I'm going to talk about all the favorite books that I read this past year. I have quite a lot of books to get through in this video. They're all of my favorites and I just can't narrow down this list. Before we dive into all my favorite books that I read in the past year, I'm gonna reach back here to our Booktuber Shoutout book and we're gonna shout out somebody randomly. Today's shout out goes to the Book Sanctum. I will leave a link to their channel in the description. Be sure to go over and subscribe to them. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up if you had a great reading year and a lot of favorite books. And of course, be sure to follow me over on Instagram and Goodreads and Storygraph and all the places. So I'm gonna start out with my favorite classics that I've read this past year. Most of these were rereads because one of my goals in 2023 was to reread a bunch of my favorite classics. I also reread a lot of favorite children's classics. And I'm also going to include the modern classics in here as well. These are mostly in chronological order, the order that I read them this past year. Backwards though. So as of the time of filming, I am still in the middle of Aquellas Mujercitas, which is Little Women in Spanish. I've been trying to read through this for the last 2 years. I have made some progress this past year. I have been enjoying it. I don't know why, I just have to push myself to pick it up, but I have been enjoying that a lot. I've been listening to an audiobook of The Woman in White. As of the time of filming, I have just a teeny bit left on that audiobook, but of course, Woman in White by Wilkie Collins is absolutely one of my favorite classics. I reread a bunch of my favorite Dickens this year. I reread Bleak House and A Tale of Two Cities and David Copperfield and loved all of those so much. Rereading those just reminds me why Dickens is one of my favorite authors. I also reread Five Little Peppers and How They Grew, and I went on to read the next books in that series, Five Little Peppers Midway and Five Little Peppers Grown Up. I listened to audiobooks of those and it was really fun and just wholesome and adorable. Just very simple, wholesome stories with that old-fashioned charm. I reread A Little Princess one time when I was sick. Somehow, Secret Garden, Little Princess, and Wind in the Willows are always my go-tos whenever I'm sick. It's like, I just need something comforting and sweet. So I reread Little Princess this year and really loved it, of course. And another time through the year when I was sick, I reread Wind in the Willows as well. I also reread North and South, which is my favorite book by Elizabeth Gaskell. And I reread The Count of Monte Cristo, which is my favorite book by Alexandre Dumas. And I read quite a bit of Shakespeare. I read Much Ado About Nothing. I read the manga classic of Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet. And I read Othello and Hamlet. Now this next one was not a reread. I read for the first time Arsène Lupin, Gentleman Thief. I was sent that book for review and oh my goodness, I completely fell in love with Lupin. I really like that he's kind of meant to be the opposite of Sherlock Holmes. And the story structure is similar to what you would see in Sherlock Holmes. It's a collection of short stories. I just loved it so much. I can't wait to read more from that series, from that author. I reread a couple of books from Edith Nesbit. I reread The Enchanted Castle and The Railway Children. During Jane Austen July, I reread Emma by Jane Austen, which is my favorite Jane Austen. And one of my goals this year was to read one new to me book from Wilkie Collins and to read one new Anthony Trollope. So for Wilkie Collins, I read The Law and the Lady. I actually listened to an audiobook of this one and really enjoyed it. Just the mystery and the suspense and the adventure and everything. Wilkie Collins can be sort of hit or miss for me, but this one was definitely wonderful. And then for Anthony Trollope, I read The Way We Live Now. Trollope has this amazing ability to just make you really, really care about the characters. And then he makes you really frustrated because the characters are being stupid. So I don't know that I can say that I really enjoyed The Way We Live Now because I was very frustrated with the stupidity of the characters, but it is a testament to the genius of Trollope. That is definitely a book that sticks with you for a long time. I also reread Waverley, which is my favorite Sir Walter Scott, and rereading it this second time really just confirmed this book as my absolute favorite Sir Walter Scott. I read 4 books in the Richard Hannay series by John John Buchan, which starts with 39 Steps, which I had already read before. But then I continued the series reading Mr. Standfast, The Three Hostages, The Island of Sheep, and The Courts of the Morning. And I just loved it. These mystery spy adventures and the intrigue and everything. Every single one of these books was so exciting and had me on the edge of my seat. But now that I finished this series, I have to figure out what is the next John Buchan book that I'm going to read. I also read a few books from Agatha Christie. I read Murder in Mesopotamia, which is a Poirot book, and I adore Poirot. And I read 13 for Luck, which is a collection of 13 short stories. And I read 13 at Dinner. But probably the favorite Agatha Christie that I read this year, I mean, they're all really wonderful, but my favorite of Agatha Christie was Murder is Announced. That one was really good because there is this advertisement in the paper that says a murder is going to occur. And everyone kind of laughs it off and thinks it must be some sort of practical joke. Then the person really is murdered. And I also read the first two books of the Dark is Rising series, Oversea and Understone, and The Dark is Rising. This is my third time reading through the series. I do intend to continue and reread the rest of the books this coming year, but the Dark is Rising series is always a favorite. I also read Tolkien's poem, The Fall of Arthur. That one was really interesting, just a really beautiful poetic style, and then there's sections of the book that talk about the history of this poetic style and then how Tolkien kind of took that poetic style and adapted it to what he wanted to do with it. So it's really interesting because not only do you have the poetry itself, but then this analysis of the poetry, and it was just really, really interesting, really lovely. And I reread The Cricket in Times Square. I reread Bedknobs and Broomsticks. I just love classic children's literature. It's just so lovely. I also reread all of the magic books from Edward Eager, Magic by the Lake, Knight's Castle, Half Magic, Magic or Not, The Time Garden, The Well-Wishers, and 7-Day Magic. And I also reread Lord of the Rings. Of course, Lord of the Rings is always a favorite, and this time reading it through, I kind of took more of an analytical approach, so it was a little different. I was looking for little details in the text. I was kind of analyzing stuff as I read through. So those are all the classics that I read and reread that were my favorites this year. Now we're going to get to the more contemporary, more modern books that were my favorites this year. I read the first 3 books of the Woodwalkers series and completely fell in love with the series, and I am desperate for the next books in the series to be translated. Just waiting for them to be translated into English so that I can read more from that series. This is about a group of people who are shapeshifters. They have an animal form and a human form, and Carrig has mostly grown up just in his animal form. He is a mountain lion, a puma, and now he's learning to live in his human form and adapt to the human world. It's really exciting and imaginative. I also really loved reading Bandersnatch, which is a nonfiction book that analyzes the influence that the Inklings had on each other. So this is J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and Owen Barfield and all those guys from the Inklings, and it analyzes the details of how they influenced each other's work and each other's writing. I found that absolutely fascinating. I also reread Tolkien's Ordinary Virtues. So this is an analysis of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit from the perspective of virtues. It's a really great way of exploring the Christian themes in Lord of the Rings and how Tolkien incorporated his faith into his writing. And I also really loved Christian Myth Makers. This is a book that gives little biographies and an analysis of the work of Christian fiction authors, going all the way back to Pilgrim's Progress, all the way through, of course, Lewis and Tolkien, and authors like Madeleine L'Engle, and even into modern authors, contemporary authors that I had never even heard of before. I found this absolutely fascinating to see how throughout history, Christians have expressed their faith through creating fictional worlds that reflect spiritual truths. I also loved reading The Last of the Really Great Whangdoodles by Julie Andrews. Yes, that Julie Andrews. Mary Poppins herself wrote a children's book. This was such an imaginative book, and it's really fun and silly and kind of wild, but it also has very meaningful moments for the characters when we see this character development for them. It was just phenomenal. I also loved reading Planet Narnia, which explores the idea that Lewis used the medieval ideas of the planets and the Greek gods behind those planets in order to kind of create a structure for the Chronicles of Narnia books. There are certain themes that are included in each book which correspond with themes that are typically related to Jupiter or Venus. It was really fascinating to see the way that the author sets up these arguments to prove this theory of Planet Narnia. I read the last book in the Myrtle Hardcastle mystery series, Myrtle Means and Opportunity. I really loved that this book kind of wraps up all of the storyline for the entire series. It has a really fun mystery, and I can't really tell you much about the book because, you know, spoilers for the last book in a series. Suffice it to say that it was a very satisfying ending. I really enjoyed the whole series. I also read the very last book in the Explorer Academy series, The Forbidden Island. This is another one where it had a really satisfying ending. All those little threads, all those questions that we've been wondering about through the entire series, they're all answered. All those things come together. There's a lot of mystery and excitement and adventure. I just love the whole Explorer Academy series. I also loved Elf Dog and Owlhead. So there is a hunting dog in the Elven Kingdom who escapes into the modern world and befriends a young boy. And the dog leads him into adventures in the magical realm that is hidden from human eyes. And of course they get into trouble and they have adventures and they meet an owl-headed person who they befriend. This was so imaginative, so heartfelt and meaningful. I also really loved Melody Queen. This is the second book in the Bollywood Academy series. One of the reasons I really loved this book is the main character wants to be a musician. And of course, I am a musician, so I really connected with her story. Her parents want her to study to be an actress because they are actors, but she really wishes that she could become a composer. So she has to kind of find her own voice and gain the courage to go after her dream. There were just so many things that I love about this series and especially this second book. And I read Daring Darlene, Queen of the Screen. Darlene is the child star of silent films. Her family owns the production company and they decide that in order to drum up some publicity for their new film, they're going to stage a fake kidnapping where Darlene will be kidnapped. However, the fake kidnapping goes wrong and Darlene gets embroiled in a real kidnapping. And of course, adventures ensue. And the last one that I'm going to talk about today is one that I just finished a few days ago, Basil of Baker Street. This is from the Great Mouse Detective series. I've always loved the Great Mouse Detective cartoon. So of course I was delighted to discover that the cartoon is actually based on a book series. I loved the first book. I'm currently in the middle of the second book of the series and I just love it so much. Please leave me a comment and let me know what are some of your favorite books that you read this past year. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.